Hi everybody, let's finish this graphite media study. Grab your supplies. Next we're going to try some cross hatching. Still going to have the light shining from the same direction every time. Cross hatching starts out the same way as hatching, with short pencil strokes that are parallel to each other, very close together. Then you're going to go back in the exact opposite direction with hatch marks that go perpendicular. They also need to fade out as you get towards the light source. So they're close together, then they get farther apart, and I also don't press down as hard as I get across the shape to the light source. Okay, the lid or the top of the can should be the same, only a little bit lighter. And then cast shadow. You don't have to do cross hatching for the shadows. You could just kind of color it in real dark and let it fade out as it goes towards the outside of your shadow. It's a little easier. Okay, for the cube, same thing. Do your hatching first. And then make sure your cross hatching goes in the exact opposite direction so that your lines are perpendicular. We're going to leave this side light because it's closest to the light, so we're just going to put a little bit of cross hatching on the top, fairly spaced apart so that we have more of a medium value. And then little cast shadow, nice and dark, pressing down, making it as black of a value as I can get. This way I have a nice range of value of dark, medium, light, and white. Okay, the cone, same thing. I'm going to start off with the same type of hatching. If you don't want to go out of the line, just make your one side a little darker. So I'm giving it a little bit of a curve. Then you go back in the opposite direction. And as you get to the light side, just put fewer strokes and less pressure so that it gets lighter as it goes to the outside. And then cast shadow. If you're going out of the lines a little bit like me, you can just clean it up a little. Okay, and then the sphere, cross hatching. Start off with hatching. Very dark on the side that's farthest away from your light source. Okay, when I start the cross hatching part, I'm still going to try to make it look round, so I'm still making it look like it's wrapping around the sphere to increase the illusion that it's three-dimensional. So giving it a slightly rounded pencil stroke. And then cast shadow. Stippling is when you use a series of dots to create your shading and your shadows. So it's better if your pencil is not super sharp if you're using a pencil for stippling. So you're going to have a very high concentration of dots on the side that's farthest away from the light. and they'll kind of dissipate as they go around to the other side of the form. You can add a little extra thick line on the side to make it look even darker. So the closer your dots are together, darker that shadow is going to be. And put a few across the top, only a little lighter, because you've got to imagine there's a little bit more light going across the top of the cylinder. And then cast shadow should be your darkest value. And you're going to do that for all of the shapes, all your forms. So I'm putting the last finishing touches on the stippling of my sphere. I'm going to add the cast shadow, making that the darkest black value. And we're saving the best for last. Blending is the type of shading that most people do and know how to do, and that's what you're most familiar with. The first three, hatching, cross-hatching, and stippling, those are shading techniques that you would use, especially if you're trying to get some extra texture. Blending is the shading technique that most people use because it's very smooth, and again, it's just something we're all very familiar with. One thing I want to say is when people are using the blending technique, they tend to smudge a lot, and I discourage that. I don't want you to use smudging so much. It's rarely really needed if you are shading and doing a good job with your shading. So we have a lot of graphite on the paper now, and if I start dragging my hand across it while I'm doing my shading, I'm going to get graphite on the back of my hand and I'm going to smear it all over the paper. So I highly recommend that you put something to cover the rest of your drawing and rest your hand on that so that you don't smudge and get graphite all over your hand, which will end up getting all over everything else. Okay, so blending. Blending is just a very controlled movement of your pencil. Now I see people a lot of times wanting to hold their pencil flat and do it with the side of the lead. That is okay if you're doing a really quick sketch, but whenever it's time to do the official shading and finish off a final draft of a drawing, you want to have a little bit more of an angle on your pencil. So I'm going to start on the far side with a dark value. So this is all about pressure. Pressing down pretty hard. And as I get towards the middle of the cylinder, I'm going to lighten my pressure gradually. And by the time I get to the far side where the light is shining, my pencil is going to barely be touching the paper. And I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. Be careful that you don't have a big overlapping part of your shading here. You don't want to have a stripe. So just be careful about that. Okay, so I've got my dark to light value. I'm going to put just kind of a medium shade on top. That's going to fade out really light as it goes across. And then a cast shadow. And that's going to be the darkest value of everything. It's going to be super dark because I'm putting a lot of pressure, making it as dark as I can. Okay, with the cube, you just want to make sure the cube has 3 separate values. So the side that's farthest from the light, that's where you're going to press down and give it your darkest value. Okay, I'm going to leave this side white because it's facing the light. I'm going to do this side kind of medium gray. Again, leaving that side white, and then I'm just going to make sure I have the darkest value, pressing down as hard as I can for the cast shadow. It's going into that box a little bit. Okay, the cone is going to be the same as the cylinder. I'm going to start with my darkest value on the side. And as I bring it around to the middle, I'm going to start lightening up on my pressure. And by the time I get to the other side, my pencil is barely touching the paper. Again, when you're finishing this off, try not to overlap so you don't have stripes in your shading as much as possible. And then your cast shadow. Should be the blackest, darkest value of all. Okay, and then last is the sphere. So you want to imagine that there's light here. So you want to let your pencil pressure lighten up as you get to that imaginary reflection in your sphere. So I don't really want there to be a perfect circle there. So I could either use a blending tool or maybe just my pinky and smudge that circle away. But now I don't really have a good highlight, so I can go back in with my eraser and just kind of put that highlight back in there. So it looks kind of shiny. And then add my cast shadow. If you really feel the need to smudge your shading, and that should only be done if you're doing something that looks like glass or shiny metal or maybe skin, then only do a couple of swipes with your finger. If you smudge it to death, it's going to look really messy, and all the oils of your fingers are going to get mixed in, and it's going to look really messy. So you want to really limit how much you smudge, and then make sure you clean it up afterwards if you do need to smudge. So if I smudge, for example, a couple of times in my cylinder, and I went out of the lines and I can see a little smudgy mess, I'm going to go back and erase right away before it has a chance to really set. Make sure that it's really clean around the outside. Okay, that's it.